All right, Dave, are the Niners going to run the table? They, they beat Pittsburgh 30-7. They beat the Rams 30-23. They beat the New York Giants on the home opener Thursday night, national TV 30-12. 35-16 over the Arizona Cardinals, 42-10 over Dallas. Are the Niners going to run the table?
So we have to look at some probability here. This is where the math doesn't work too well for the 49ers because I think they're going to be favored in every single game the rest of this season. Philadelphia might be close. We'll see how both of those teams are playing. But the way that it's angling right now, I think the 49ers will be slight favorites in Philadelphia. But just for the simplicity of argument's sake, say that the 49ers have an 80% chance to win each of their remaining games. It's 12 games. So they have an 80% chance this week against the Browns, 80% chance against the Vikings. And some weeks it's going to be higher. Some weeks it's going to be lower. It normally isn't much higher than 80%, though, in the NFL. The probability of winning all 12 is like sweeping a 12-team parlay. So you got to multiply 80% by 80% by 80%. If you go to the 12th power, if you multiply that 12 times, you end up at a 6.8% chance of running the table. So probably
the stats
not.
Say
right?
no. Stats say no.
Yeah, the stats say no. But that
what
being
did you
said,
predict at the beginning of the year? Because I had them at 11-6.
I think I predicted 12-5. I predicted
12 and
it.
5.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They went 13-4 last year, right? And I figured there might be one extra loss in there because the travel is really brutal this year. They're playing a first place schedule this year. That's tougher too. So I just figured, 12-5, they'll win the division, and that might be enough for the 1 seed. It might not be. We'll see how the rest of the league does, kind of thing. But I think they're going to be better than 12-5 now. That's for sure, because Purdy's taken a jump that's even greater than what I thought he was going to take. I thought he was going to be better. He was already really good last year. I thought that would take a step up, but he's playing as the best quarterback in the league right now. I don't know if that's going to hold up. I think it will stay within the top 5 for sure. And if that's the case, combined with a really good defense, that's enough to be a Super Bowl favorite, right? But going 17-0 is a different story because you have to beat that probability. And it's really, really hard to beat that probability because at some point you're going to have a sleepy day. You're going to have some bad luck officiating wise, turnover wise, and stuff will snowball against you. Now, there could be a day like that the 49ers win on anyway. And when that happens, it's kind of like a perfect game, right? That's like when Gregor Blanco makes the catch in Matt Cain's perfect game. When there's something that's supposed to be a hit, or in this case, that's supposed to be a loss that turns into a win, and that might happen here in the next few weeks, that's when we can start saying, "Ooh, will this team go 17-0?" Because they've dodged that bullet, right? They've dodged a bullet that they were supposed to lose. They won. That hasn't quite happened yet. We're still so early in this, so it's still much less likely than it is likely.
Well, okay, so let's go through it real quick. Okay, so you get Cleveland this week, and they sound like they're going to have, is it Philip Walker, or is that name?
PJ Walker.
PJ Walker at quarterback. They still have a killer defense, Denzel Ward, Myles Garrett. It's in Cleveland. Who knows about the weather? It might be rainy. Could be wet. Then you get Minnesota. In Minnesota, they're not going to have Justin Jefferson. So that's easily their best player. That will hurt them. Then the one that I think is kind of the hard game that nobody's talking about is October 29th, Week 8 against Cincinnati. Just from the standpoint, the Niners are going to play Monday, October 23rd, on the road in Minnesota. They're going to have a short week and have to travel home from Minnesota on the short week. Cincinnati has a Week 7 bye. So they're going to roll into that game with like 13 days of rest and probably desperate to get a win because of their slow start. So I think that Cincinnati game on paper is really, really tough.
Yeah, it's not an 80%er, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that article from earlier this offseason about the rest advantage? That was a major rest disadvantage for the Niners in that game.
Well, they have one this week, too. Cleveland's coming off a bye.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So that's big. So both these Ohio games are going to be tough. And then Jacksonville, of course, Cincinnati's going to be at Levi's, but against the Ohio teams. Then you get after the bye week, Jacksonville on the road. They're, um, if you catch them on the right day, you might be able to blow them out. I saw Houston destroy them in Jacksonville. And in November, if you're going to play Jacksonville, in Jacksonville, Florida, middle of November, that's great. That means it's a reasonable weather. You don't have to deal with the terrible weather. But they're a very talented team on both sides of the ball. Anything can happen there. And then to me, what's really hard is you get Seattle on Thanksgiving there, and then you get Philly in between. Then you get Seattle again. And Dave, you know this. I mean, it is really difficult to beat an NFL team twice in a 3-week span. I just think that to me, if the Niners get to week 15 against Arizona and they're still undefeated, then I think they run the table. But if I think the loss comes somewhere between, and I'm not expecting a lot of losses. I'm expecting 1 or 2. I'm thinking 15-1 or 16-1, 15-2, something like that. But I think it comes somewhere. The losses come somewhere between week 6 and week 14. If the Niners get to week 15 and they're still undefeated, then they get Arizona on the road, Baltimore on Christmas at home, which could be tough, but still, at Washington, and then the Rams at home. I think the trouble spot starts right now and goes through week 14. They get to week 15, they're going to run the table.
I think that primetime games at home against Central and Eastern time zone teams are like the inverse of the early body clock starts for West Coast teams going out to the East Coast. The 49ers seem to have a big advantage in those, right? So we've seen them they just blew the doors off of Dallas in a primetime game at home. I think that just is so much more agreeable to obviously travel wise, it's better for the 49ers. Body clock wise, it's better, but they do have these rest disadvantages starting this week against the Browns and then against the Bengals that I think are significant. And then the miles will add up over the course of the season. They're flying, and this is typical for San Francisco and Seattle because those are the two outposts, especially Seattle, that are further away than anything else in the NFL. They're flying about 30,000 air miles this year, which is enough to circumnavigate the globe. And only the Seahawks are flying 1,000 or 2 more. So that kind of stuff, I think, starts to have its real wear and tear on you toward the back half of the season. And you would think that at some point fatigue might get you. That being said, if you stay as healthy as the 49ers have, and I don't think they will, I'm knocking on wood because nobody likes injuries anywhere. Everybody wants to see all of these teams stay as healthy as possible. But if you stay reasonably healthy, you have depth and you don't have to start going to very unknown commodities on special teams. That was a big issue, right? In 2021, all the injuries, they're going to unknown commodities on special teams. Richard Hightower was struggling as a coordinator to begin with, but then he had guys out of position on the coverage units, and it was all bad. And that's how teams upset you, right? They get a few cheap yards or maybe even cheap points on special teams because you're not quite as strong as you were early in the season due to injuries, and then all of a sudden you're running a bad game script because you're trying to come from behind, and that's exactly how they lost to Seattle, in fact, on the road a couple years ago. So the probability of that happening at some point in a long marathon of an NFL season is fairly high. That's why I say if they can dodge that bullet when it does come, because it almost seems inevitable that at some point there will be some adversity, they can find a way to win that game. That's when we can start, talking about it. But right now, there's just, as you said, there's too many potential thorns, too many potential little roadblocks. And that's why something like at this point, 15-2 is probably the most likely record for the 49ers.